So the news has broken in the past hour or so that Chris Eubank Sr. is demanding that his son Chris Eubank Jr. is pulled out of his fight with Conor Benn due to concerns surrounding the 157-pound catch weight. So I'm going to be reading from an article uploaded by TalkSport. I'll leave it linked in the description box in case you want to check it out. It's not particularly long, but there are some quotes from Chris Eubank Sr. which I'm going to read for you guys now. So the first quote I can see: if you have a child and someone's trying to actually take that child away from you and do something wrong to that child, as a dad, you wouldn't let them. That's all I'm doing. This is modern day gladiating. This is not a plaything for the audience. We have to be strict, otherwise lives are put in danger, and my son's life cannot be put in danger. I've already lost one. It cannot happen again. And just to interject there, for those who don't know, I believe it's Chris Eubank Senior's second oldest son, Sebastian. So it's Chris Jr.'s younger brother. He actually died last year. The official mainstream narrative surrounding his death was that he drowned while out in Dubai, I believe. But to continue with Chris Senior's quotes, I've given him my direction. If he doesn't want to follow it, he will be dragged along, but he will do what is right for him. He is coming down below 160 pounds, which cannot happen on my watch. And there's a slight transcript here between from a conversation between Nigel Benn and Chris Senior. And so Nigel Benn has asked, so you're putting your foot down, saying to your son at 32 years old, the fight is not happening. And supposedly Chris Senior replied, absolutely. Now, I want to take this all with a pinch of salt and I'm going to go into why. Firstly, I've already seen people who suspect that this is some ploy, some use of mental mind games on behalf of Eubank team. And I don't think that would be completely unreasonable, because this kind of thing, is the fight on, is it not on? This all feeds into the kind of the mind games and the mental warfare. So I get that, fair enough. But I'm not completely sold on that theory alone. I do think there is some legitimacy to this, because if we look at who Chris Eubank Sr. is, he is someone who in the last year who has actually lost a child. He lost his second eldest son. I believe Sebastian Eubank was the second eldest. Correct me if I'm wrong. But nevertheless, he lost a child. And now, one thing I've heard in my life a lot, and I think it really goes without saying, is that it's always harder for a parent to lose their child than for a child to lose their parent. There's something particularly difficult about a parent outliving their child, because it's supposed to be the other way around. It's supposed to be the parent raising the child until the child is strong enough and mature enough to see life out by themselves. And that death is like the death of a parent is like the final test before you begin that cycle yourself as the parent. But when your child's life is cut short, that can be extremely traumatic and on a parent. And Chris Eubank Senior has had to live through that. So I'd understand that he's probably still dealing with the aftermath of losing a child. And his eldest son, Chris Jr., is still alive, yes, but he's in a sport where you can lose your life. You can lose your life, you can be left permanently injured. All these horrific things can happen in this sport that isn't just the sport. It is the modern day gladiators. I know Chris Eubank Sr. says gladiating. I'm not entirely sure that's an actual word, but that is what it is. It's combat. These guys, these fighters, they are modern day gladiators. Yes, they do it for a prize, but they still get in there and try and knock 7 bells out of each other. And some people don't understand that, but Chris Eubank Sr., he understands that better than anyone, because not only was he a prize fighter himself, but he was in the forefront of incidents where his opponents had been permanently injured. I think most of us all know that Chris Eubank Sr. had his 2 fights with Michael Watson, and in the second fight, Michael Watson, his whole life was just turned upside down, and he was left permanently injured. And thankfully, he was able to make a very miraculous recovery to the point where I believe he's able to function mostly independently these days. But that was still, I think it was still touch and go, to say the least. And of course, he was in a very precarious situation and condition following that second Eubank Senior fight. But not just Chris Eubank Senior's own experiences with his opponents, but if you look at the career of Nigel Benn, his main arch nemesis, if you will, main rival, even he was had his own situation with Gerald McClellan, where McClellan was left permanently injured and unfortunately didn't make as good a recovery as Michael Watson did. So you have to look at it from the perspective of these guys, where they were in the forefront of these traumatic incidents following a boxing match. And those 2 incidents, the Michael Watson fight and the Gerald McClellan fights for Nigel Benn, or fight for Nigel Benn, they were actually pivotal in how the rules and regulations and the safety precautions surrounding professional boxing are where they are now, because it wasn't always like how it is now. There weren't always medical teams and ambulances by the fight, by the arena, ready to jump into action should anything happen. It wasn't like that. In those fights, as I say, they were pivotal in bringing about those changes. So I can understand why Chris Eubank Sr. would have these concerns, because they're legitimate from my perspective. Because yes, this fight isn't seen as being particularly competitive, but there is still a question mark surrounding how can Chris Eubank Jr. make this weight, because he's someone, he said it on a few occasions, that he hasn't weighed in at 157 pounds, or he hasn't weighed 157 pounds since he was a teenager. And now I personally don't have much reason to not believe that, because if you look at Chris Eubank, he typically weighs in for his fights at 160 pounds, maybe a shade under, around 159. And at that weight, he's got very little fat on his body. So a lot of people are going to think, oh, you know, another 2 pounds to get to 157 pounds, that's not much. That's a lot when you don't have really that much else to lose in terms of fat. You have to imagine that that's going to be 2 pounds of water. And where's that water going to come from? It's going to come from his muscles. It's going to come from the inside of his skull, the fluid that protects his brain. And all these things, sometimes it can become the perfect storm, and a fighter does get injured, especially in a fight where they're expected to probably just breeze it. So there is always this kind of concern going into situations like this. It's, as I say, it is a question mark. And as a parent who's just lost a child and who's had, you know, rivals of their own who have been left permanently damaged and injured, I can understand the concern. Does this mean that the fight gets pulled though? Personally, I don't think so. I think I'd be quite surprised actually if this fight doesn't go ahead, because despite the parental concern coming from Eubank Sr., Chris Eubank Jr. is a grown man. As the article stated, he's 32 years old. So he was presented with a choice. Do you want to take this fight? Yes or no? He chose yes. He signed on the dotted line. He accepted the terms, and you have to go through with it. It's as simple as that. You accept the prize that comes with winning, or just even participating in a fight like this. And you have to accept the inherent risks as well. That's part of putting your name down for a fight. Chris Eubank Jr. did it, but also the weight negotiations, they weren't a secret. So I don't know why this news has only just broken now, when it's less than a month until the fight comes about. This was always in the public eye, at least from what I saw. It was never going to be at 160 pounds. It was always going to be slightly under. So yeah, I don't know where this outrage from Senior has come. Where has it been for the past couple of weeks? And just to touch on the whole warrior code thing, wouldn't pulling out of this fight, wouldn't that break the Warrior Code, the Eubank Warrior Code? Because these are things that the Eubanks have spoken about for years. The Warrior Code, you never back down, you never give in. Does that only count when the fight has begun? Because if that is the case, it kind of makes sense, because Chris Eubank Jr., his career has been marked with some skepticism, and I think that's very valid skepticism, because there are fights that haven't materialized. Famously, he lost his pen against, or in the negotiations for the fight against Golovkin, and now he's picking on a welterweight, and I say picking on inverted commas. I know, don't get at me in the comments. Yeah, the Warrior Code. I don't know. It's a bit hit or miss, it seems these days, the old Eubank Warrior Code. But moral of the story, do I see this fight getting called off? No, I don't. I think both guys, Chris Jr. and Conor Benn, they are in it to win it, and they understand the prizes that come with it, and they're more than happy to go ahead by the looks of it. I think this is a headline more than anything. I don't think it's entirely mind games. I do think there's some legitimacy to Eubank Jr., Eubank Seniors. I've mixed their names up so much this video. I apologise, guys. I do think there's some legitimacy to Eubank Senior's concerns, but at the end of the day, he is on the sideline. His son is a grown man, and he signed on the dotted line, and the fight's going to go ahead unless either Eubank Jr. or Conor Benn pull out for whatever reason. But that is just my take on this news. What do you think? Leave it in the comment section below. I'll get back to you. And as always, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next video.